The message arrived on Velthar's communication device just after the morning cycle. The words glowed in the standard Galactic Coalition format, cold and official. Observer Velthar had been selected for a special assignment. The message said it was an honor. Velthar did not feel honored. Velthar belonged to the Krell, a species that had joined the Coalition 300 years ago. The Krell were prey animals on their homeworld. Their ancestors had survived by running, by hiding, by detecting danger before it arrived. Even now, after centuries of civilization, every Krell carried those instincts deep in their bones. Violence made them sick. The sight of blood made them faint. Wars were things they studied from safe distances, never something they participated in. The assignment was simple on paper. Velthar would observe a newly recruited species in combat. The species was called human. They came from a planet called Earth, a world the Coalition had only recently made contact with. Humans had primitive technology compared to most Coalition members. Their weapons were crude. Their ships were slow, but they had volunteered to fight in the war against the Void Swarm. The Void Swarm was the reason the Coalition existed. The swarm came from dark space, from regions where no stars shone. They consumed everything in their path. Planets, ships, entire star systems disappeared into their hunger. The Coalition fought them for survival, but the war was not going well. Losses mounted every cycle. New troops were needed desperately. Humans had appeared at exactly the right time, or perhaps the wrong time, depending on how one looked at it. They had offered their military forces without hesitation. The Coalition command had been surprised but grateful. Primitive species usually took years to integrate into Coalition warfare. Humans had been ready in months. Velthar's job was to observe and document. How did humans fight? What were their tactics? How did they react to the horror of the Void Swarm? The data would help command decide how to use human forces most effectively. It was purely academic work, they said. Safe work. Velthar would watch from an observation ship, far from the actual fighting. The observation ship departed 2 cycles later. Velthar spent the journey reading files about humans. They were strange creatures. They came from a death world, a planet where almost everything tried to kill everything else. Humans had climbed to the top of their food chain not through strength or speed, but through persistence and intelligence. And violence. So much violence. The files showed that humans fought each other constantly throughout their history, war after war, century after century. They had nearly destroyed themselves with nuclear weapons once. Somehow they had survived and kept fighting. Now they wanted to fight the Void Swarm too. Velthar would be observing Squad 7, one of the first human units deployed to the front lines. The squad leader was named Hana. She was 26 years old by human reckoning. Young for a leader, Velthar thought. But the file said she had experience. She had been a soldier in her nation's army before the Coalition arrived. The squad had 5 members. Hana led them. Deho was the rifleman, the main fighter. He was 30 years old and had been a soldier for 12 years. Minho was the medic, trained to save lives under fire. He was 24. Jiwan was the engineer, responsible for equipment and fortifications. She was 28. Yuna was the sniper, trained to kill from long distances. She was 25, all of them had volunteered. This fact disturbed Velthar more than anything else in the files. They knew what war meant. They had seen death before, yet they chose to come here, to fight monsters from dark space, to risk everything for species they had never met. The observation ship arrived at Threshold 9, a mining colony on the edge of Coalition space. The colony produced rare metals needed for ship construction. It was valuable. It was also exposed. The Void Swarm had been probing this sector for weeks. An attack was expected soon. Squad 7 arrived on a transport ship the same day. Velthar watched them disembark through the observation cameras. They looked smaller than expected. Humans averaged about 1.7 meters in height, shorter than most Coalition species. They wore bulky armor that made them look awkward. They carried weapons that seemed too heavy for their frames, but they moved with confidence. Hana checked her equipment with practiced ease. Deho tested his rifle's sight. Minho organized his medical supplies. Jiwan examined the colony's defensive systems. Yuna found a high position and scanned the horizon through her scope. They knew what they were doing. Velthar activated the observation equipment. Cameras, sensors, and recording devices all came online. Multiple screens showed different views of the squad. Audio feeds picked up their communications. Biomonitors tracked their vital signs. Everything was ready for documentation. The observation ship maintained a position 10,000 kilometers above the colony, far enough to be safe from ground combat, close enough to gather detailed data. Velthar settled into the command chair and prepared to wait. First combat engagement was scheduled in 6 hours according to intelligence reports. Velthar watched Hana gather her squad for a briefing. The humans stood in a circle, their faces serious but calm. Hana pointed to a map of the colony, explaining defensive positions and fallback points. The others nodded and asked questions. They were professionals. This should be a straightforward observation assignment. 3 hours passed. Velthar reviewed the documentation protocols and prepared the report templates. Everything had to be properly filed. Command wanted detailed analysis of human combat behavior, tactics, decision-making, stress responses, unit cohesion. All of it needed to be recorded and studied. 4 hours. The squad took up defensive positions around the colony's main reactor. It was the most critical structure, the one that had to be protected at all costs. Hana positioned Deho at the main entrance. Minho set up a medical station in a protected alcove. Jiwan began reinforcing weak points in the perimeter. Yuna climbed to the highest tower with clear sightlines in all directions. 5 hours. The waiting was hard. Velthar had never been this close to an expected combat zone before. Even from orbit, even in complete safety, the anticipation made Velthar's hearts beat faster. This was prey instinct, the fear of predators arriving. Velthar tried to suppress it. This was a professional assignment. There was nothing to fear. The alarm sounded at hour 5 and 43 minutes. The Void Swarm had arrived early. They came in fast, faster than intelligence had predicted. Dozens of them, then hundreds pouring out of dark space like a black tide. Velthar's hands trembled as they activated all recording systems. This was it. The observation was beginning. Velthar had no idea what was about to happen. No idea what humans became when they fought. No idea that in the next few hours everything Velthar understood about warfare and survival would be destroyed forever. The observation was beginning, but Velthar was not ready. No prey species could ever be ready to watch predators hunt. The Void Swarm hit the colony like a hammer. One moment the sky was clear, the next it was black with creatures. They moved in waves, chittering and screaming. Each one was the size of a human, covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb light. They had too many legs, too many claws, and mouths that opened in wrong directions. Velthar's screens filled with chaos. Every camera showed movement, violence, death approaching. The observer's training said to remain calm and document everything. But training was one thing. Reality was another. Velthar's hands shook so badly it was hard to work the controls. Then Hana's voice cut through the noise. Clear, calm. She gave orders like she was discussing the weather. Deho, take the left flank. Minho, stay central and ready. Jiwan, activate the barriers. Yuna, priority targets on the tower positions. The squad responded instantly. No hesitation. No panic. The first creatures reached Deho's position. He opened fire. The sound was deafening even through the audio filters. His rifle spat rounds so fast they blurred together. Creatures fell. More came, he kept firing. When they got close, he drew a knife. An actual blade, primitive and brutal. He used it without flinching. Velthar felt sick. The Krell did not have weapons like this. They had never needed them. Watching Deho fight was like watching a natural disaster. Efficient, merciless. He moved between gunfire and blade work seamlessly. A creature lunged at him. He sidestepped and shot it in what passed for a head. Another attacked from behind. He spun and stabbed it without looking. Jiwan's barriers activated just as a wave of creatures rushed the reactor entrance. Energy fields sparked to life, cutting off the main approach. The creatures slammed into the barriers and burned. The smell must have been terrible. Jiwan was already moving to the next position, setting up more defenses, turning the battlefield into a maze of death. Some creatures found gaps in the barriers. They were smart enough to probe for weaknesses. They found one near the eastern wall. 20 of them poured through. Hana saw it happen. She redirected Deho with a single word. He was there in seconds, moving faster than should be possible in that armor. He held the gap alone. One human against 20 monsters. Velthar wanted to look away. Every instinct screamed to close the feeds, to hide from the violence. But the mission demanded observation. So Velthar watched Deho hold that position for 5 minutes that felt like hours. He ran out of ammunition, switched to his sidearm, Ran out of that too. Used his knife. Used his fists. Used his helmet as a weapon when everything else failed. Yuna's rifle cracked from the tower. Each shot was precise. Each shot killed. She fired slowly, deliberately, choosing targets with care. She prioritized the largest creatures, the ones that could break through barriers, the ones that could kill her squad. Her hands never shook. Her breathing never changed. She was a machine made of flesh. A cluster of creatures made it past the defenses and reached Minho's medical station. He was tending to a wounded colonist. He could have run. Should have run. Instead, he put himself between the creatures and his patient. He had a pistol, he used it. When it ran empty, he grabbed a metal rod from the medical supplies and swung it like a club. Velthar watched Minho fight with the same hands that saved lives. Those gentle hands that bandaged wounds now broke chitin and crushed joints. He protected his patient with savage determination. Deho reached him 30 seconds later and cleared the creatures out. Minho immediately returned to treating the colonist as if nothing had happened. The battle continued. Velthar lost track of time. Minutes or hours it all blurred together. The screens showed horror after horror, humans fighting with weapons, with tools, with bare hands when necessary. They did not break. They did not run. When one position became untenable, they fell back to the next one and kept fighting. Hana coordinated everything. She saw the whole battlefield while fighting her own battles. She directed fire, called out threats, managed ammunition distribution, and still found time to shoot creatures herself. Her voice never wavered. Her orders never stopped. She was the center that held her squad together. Jiwan rigged an explosive trap while creatures swarmed around her. She worked calmly, connecting wires and setting timers as claws scraped against her armor. She finished just as they broke through. The explosion vaporized 15 creatures and bought the squad 2 minutes of breathing room. Jiwan was already setting up the next trap. Velthar's biomonitors showed the squad's vital signs. Heart rates elevated but steady. Stress hormones high but manageable. They were afraid. Of course they were afraid. But they functioned through the fear. They did not freeze. They did not panic. They fought like their fear did not matter. A massive creature emerged from the swarm, twice the size of the others, covered in thicker armor. It moved toward the reactor with single-minded purpose. Yuna shot it 3 times. The rounds bounced off. Deho hit it with a grenade. It stumbled but kept coming. Hana made a decision in seconds. Fall back to secondary positions. Let it through the outer defenses. The squad retreated in perfect order, covering each other. Moving as a unit, the large creature followed them straight into Jiwan's trap. The explosion was massive. It brought down part of the structure. The creature did not survive. Neither did 30 smaller ones that had been following it. The swarm began to pull back. They had lost too many. The colony's defenses held. The reactor was intact. Squad 7 had won. Velthar sat in the observation chair, trembling. The observer had witnessed the entire battle, had documented it all, but understanding what happened was impossible. Humans were not supposed to fight like this. The files said they were primitive, expendable, cannon fodder for the Coalition's desperate war. But what Velthar had just witnessed was not primitive. It was terrifying. The humans had faced a force that outnumbered them 50 to 1. They had held. They had won. On the screens, Hana checked on her squad. Daiho had minor injuries. Minho was treating them while sporting his own cuts and bruises. Jiwan's armor was cracked in 3 places. Yuna was reloading her rifle with steady hands. They were exhausted. They were hurt, but they were alive and already preparing for the next attack. Velthar tried to start the report. Fingers hovered over the input device. But what could be written? What words existed to describe what humans became in battle? The Krell had no frame of reference for this kind of violence, for this kind of determination, for this kind of controlled savagery. The observation ship's sensors detected Velthar's distress. Medical alerts appeared on secondary screens. Elevated stress, trauma responses. The ship's AI suggested sedatives. Velthar declined. There would be more battles to observe. More documentation required. The mission was not complete. But deep inside, in the part of Velthar that remained pure Krell, pure prey, a terrible knowledge was forming. Humans were predators, real predators. The kind that hunted in packs, that used tools, that planned and adapted and never gave up. Earth had not been a paradise world. It had been a crucible that forged killers, and the Coalition had invited them to war. Velthar watched Hana's squad settle in for the night, still alert, still ready. The observer finally understood the terrible truth. Humans were not going to be cannon fodder. They were going to be something far more dangerous. Something the galaxy had not seen in millennia. They were going to win. 72 hours, 3 full days of continuous combat. The Void Swarm had not stopped attacking. They came in waves, relentless and hungry. Each wave was beaten back. Each wave cost something. Velthar had stopped counting the creatures that died, had stopped counting the close calls, had stopped trying to write coherent reports. The observation feeds ran constantly. Velthar could not look away and could not bear to look. The observer sat frozen in the command chair, screens showing violence that made no sense to prey instincts. Sleep was impossible. Food tasted like ash. The ship's medical systems warned about Velthar's deteriorating condition. The warnings were ignored. Squad 7 should have broken by now. Coalition psychologists said humans had limits. 3 days of combat exceeded those limits. But the files were wrong. The psychologists had never seen humans like these. Teho fought with 3 broken ribs. Velthar had watched it happen. A creature had slammed into him during hour 48. The biomonitor showed the injury clearly. Minho had tried to evacuate Deho, standard procedure for serious injuries. Deho had refused. He took painkillers and returned to his position. He fought for 24 more hours with bones grinding together. His accuracy never dropped. His determination never wavered. He just kept fighting. Velthar could not process this. No species fought through that kind of pain. It was not logical. It was not survival instinct. It was something else entirely. Something the Krell had no word for. Humans called it duty, or loyalty, or stubbornness. Whatever the name, it terrified Velthar more than the Void Swarm did. Reinforcements were supposed to arrive at hour 60. They never came. The swarm had cut off the supply lines. Squad 7 was alone. Hana received the news without reaction. She adjusted her tactics and kept fighting. She did not complain, did not question. She just adapted to the new reality and moved forward. The reactor became their fortress. They held it with depleting ammunition and failing equipment. Jiwan worked miracles with what remained. She welded broken barriers back together while creatures clawed at her position. She repaired weapons with spare parts that were not meant to fit. She kept the defenses running through exhaustion and desperation. Velthar watched her work during a brief lull at hour 65. Jiwan's hands shook from fatigue. Her eyes were bloodshot. She had not slept since the siege began, but she soldered connections with steady precision. When a creature broke through nearby, she grabbed her sidearm and shot it without stopping her work. Then she went back to welding as if nothing had happened. Minho performed surgery in collapsed tunnels. The medical station had been destroyed at hour 53. He moved to a backup location. Then that was destroyed too. Now he worked wherever he could find space. He treated injuries under fire. He carried wounded colonists through combat zones to reach safety. He saved lives while his own was constantly threatened. Velthar had watched Minho drag a colonist to safety while creatures swarmed around them. The colonist was twice Minho's size. The medic carried him anyway. He took 3 hits to his armor during the extraction. The armor held but barely. Minho got the colonist to safety and immediately began treating another casualty. No rest, no pause. Just endless grinding work. Yuna ran out of rifle ammunition at hour 68. Velthar expected her to fall back to find different work. Instead, she switched to improvised weapons. She used debris as projectiles. She dropped heavy objects on creatures from her tower position. She made every piece of wreckage into a weapon. The killing never stopped. The biomonitors showed impossible readings. Heart rates that should cause collapse. Stress hormones that should shut down higher functions. Exhaustion levels that should mean unconsciousness. But the squad kept moving. Kept fighting. Kept holding the line. They operated beyond what Coalition science said was survivable. Velthar experienced system failures that had no physical cause. The observation equipment worked perfectly. The ship's system showed no malfunctions. But Velthar could not process the data anymore. Could not understand what the screens showed. The violence had become white noise. The horror had become normal. This was what trauma felt like. Coalition Command sent messages demanding detailed reports. Velthar sent back fragments. Incomplete data. Corrupted files. The transmissions claimed equipment problems. It was easier than admitting the truth. The truth was that Velthar could not find words for what humans were, could not explain what they became when pushed to their limits. At hour 70, Squad 7 had lost half their ammunition. Most of their equipment was broken or jury-rigged. They were wounded, exhausted, and surrounded. By every tactical measure, they should surrender or retreat. They did neither. Hana called her squad together for 30 seconds. They touched fists. Then they returned to their positions and kept fighting. Velthar finally understood something terrible. Humans did not fight to win. They fought because surrender was not acceptable. Retreat was not acceptable. They would hold their position until they died or until the enemy broke. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, just absolute commitment to a task they had accepted. The swarm launched a massive assault at hour 71. Everything they had left. Final push to break through. Hundreds of creatures attacked simultaneously. The colony's automated defenses had failed hours ago. Only Squad 7 remained. 5 humans against an army of monsters. Velthar could not watch. For the first time since the observation began, the observer closed the feeds, shut down the screens, sat in darkness and silence. The sounds of battle still came through the audio systems, gunfire, explosions, screaming, both human and not human. Velthar covered what passed for ears and tried not to hear. The battle lasted 47 minutes. When silence finally came, Velthar was afraid to look, afraid of what the screens would show. But duty demanded it. The feeds reactivated. The reactor still stood. Squad 7 was still alive. Barely. They stood among piles of dead creatures covered in blood and worse things. But they stood. Deho leaned against a wall, his rifle empty and his armor cracked. Minho sat on the ground, too tired to stand. Jiwon's welding torch had finally died. Yuna had climbed down from her tower because it was no longer stable. Hana checked each of them, made sure they were alive. Then she reported to command that the reactor was secure. The Void Swarm withdrew. They had nothing left to attack with. They had lost thousands to kill dozens of colonists and no humans at all. It made no tactical sense. They should have won. The numbers said they should have won. But numbers did not account for human determination. Velthar sat in the command chair, shaking. The observer had witnessed 72 hours of combat, had seen things that would cause nightmares forever, had watched 5 humans hold against impossible odds, and Velthar finally understood why the galaxy should be afraid, not of the Void Swarm, of humanity. Command sent new orders. Continue observation. Document recovery procedures. Analyze post-combat behavior. Standard protocol. But Velthar could not continue, could not watch anymore, could not pretend this was normal scientific study. This was not observation. This was witnessing evolution. Watching prey species realize they were in the presence of apex predators. Velthar sent a message to command requesting immediate reassignment. Any reason would do. Equipment failure. Medical emergency. Anything to leave this place. To stop watching humans fight. To escape the knowledge that could not be unknown. That humans were not like other species. They were something the galaxy had not prepared for. Something wonderful and terrible in equal measure. The reassignment request was denied. Coalition High Command sent a direct message. Observer Velthar would remain at Threshold 9 until a comprehensive analysis was complete. No exceptions. No alternatives. The humans had the highest survival and effectiveness ratings of any unit in the sector. Command needed to understand why. Velthar's personal discomfort was not relevant, so Velthar remained. Watched Squad 7 recover from their 72-hour battle. Watched them clean weapons, repair armor, and treat injuries. They moved slowly now. The adrenaline had worn off. Exhaustion showed in every movement. But they did not complain, did not request relief. They just prepared for the next engagement. Command wanted interviews, direct contact with the human subjects. Velthar protested. The observer was not trained for field work, was not mentally prepared to face humans in person, but orders were orders. A shuttle was dispatched. Velthar descended to the colony surface for the first time. The colony looked worse up close. Buildings were scorched and collapsed. Craters marked where explosions had occurred. The air smelled like death and burning plastic. Squad 7 was camped near the reactor in a hastily erected shelter. They looked up when Velthar approached. Their eyes were tired but alert. Always alert, Hana stood to greet the observer. She was shorter than Velthar expected. All humans were smaller in person, but she carried herself with absolute confidence. She offered a hand in the human greeting gesture. Velthar hesitated. Touching a predator went against every instinct, but refusing would be rude. The observer took Hana's hand briefly. Her grip was gentle, careful, like she knew how much damage she could cause and chose not to. Velthar found that more frightening than violence would have been. It meant control. It meant choice. Humans could turn their violence on and off like a switch. They sat for the interview. Velthar had prepared questions, standard psychological assessment protocols, but the words stuck in the observer's throat. How did you fight for 3 days? How did you keep going when everything said you should stop? How are you not broken? Hana answered before the questions were asked. She seemed to understand what Velthar needed to know. She explained that humans had been fighting forever. War was in their history. It was terrible, and they hated it. But they were good at it. And right now the galaxy needed people who were good at war. There was no glory in her voice. No pride in the violence. Just weary acceptance of a job that needed doing. She talked about her squad. How they trusted each other. How they fought not for abstract causes but for each other. If Daiho held his position, it was because Minho needed him to. If Jiwon built defenses, it was because Yuna needed them. Everything came back to the squad. Velthar asked about the broken ribs. Why had Daiho refused evacuation? Hana looked at her rifleman. Daiho shrugged and said something simple. The squad needed him. That was all. No elaborate explanation. No philosophical justification. The squad needed him, so he stayed. End of discussion. Minho sat nearby cleaning his medical equipment. His hand still shook slightly. Combat fatigue, he explained when he noticed Velthar watching. It would pass in a few days, but his hands would be steady when it mattered. When someone needed treatment, the shaking stopped. The body knew what was important. Velthar asked about treating injuries under fire, about carrying wounded through combat zones, about the risks he took. Minho looked confused by the question. Of course he took risks. People were hurt. He was a medic. What else would he do? Leave them? That was not acceptable. The risk did not matter compared to the lives he could save. Jiwon showed Velthar her repairs. She pointed out where she had improvised solutions with wrong parts, where she had welded under impossible conditions. She seemed almost embarrassed by the rough work, said it was not up to her usual standards, but it held. That was what mattered. Quality could wait. Function could not. Yuna was the quietest of the squad. She spoke only when asked direct questions, but her eyes never stopped moving, always watching, always assessing threats. Even here, in relative safety, surrounded by her squad, she remained alert. Velthar realized this was not paranoia. This was professionalism, the vigilance that kept them alive. The interview lasted 2 hours. Velthar learned more in that time than in 72 hours of observation. Learned that humans did not enjoy war. They endured it. They did not fight for glory. They fought for each other. They did not seek violence. They were just very, very good at it when necessary. Most importantly, Velthar learned that they were not mindless killers. They cared deeply about casualties, about losses. Hana's voice broke slightly when she mentioned colonists they could not save. Minho looked away when asked about patients who died despite his best efforts. They felt the weight of every death. This was the part that made no sense to Velthar. How could they care so much and still function? How could they grieve and still fight? Prey species broke under that emotional weight, but humans carried it, used it somehow, turned their grief into determination, their losses into resolve. They weaponized their emotions. Before leaving, Velthar asked one final question. Why did they volunteer? Why come to an alien war, fight for species they never met, die for causes that were not their own? Hana thought for a moment. Then she said something that changed everything Velthar understood about humans. She said that Earth had problems. Humans fought each other too often, but they all lived on the same planet, breathed the same air. They were learning slowly that they were one species. And if one species could be worth protecting, then maybe all species were. Maybe the differences between Krell and human were smaller than the things they shared. Maybe, Hana said, humans fought because someone had to. Because the void swarm would not stop on its own. Because running and hiding only worked until there was nowhere left to run. Someone had to stand and fight. Humans were good at that, so here they were. Velthar returned to the observation ship. The report took 3 days to write. It was the most difficult document the Observer had ever created, because it required honesty, required admitting that the Coalition had been wrong about humans. They were not cannon fodder. They were not expendable. They were the kind of soldiers that turned losing wars into winning ones. The report recommended immediate changes. Human forces should be integrated at strategic levels, given command authority, trusted with critical operations. They should not be wasted in frontal assaults. They were too valuable, too effective, too necessary for victory. The report also included a personal note. Observer Velthar was psychologically unsuited for further human observation. The trauma was too severe, but Velthar requested assignment to Human Liaison Corps anyway, because someone had to help the Coalition understand what humanity offered. Someone had to bridge the gap between prey and predator. Someone had to try. At the bottom of the report, Velthar added one final line, an apology, to Squad 7, to all human forces, for treating them as expendable, for not understanding what they were until it was almost too late, for being blind to their value because fear clouded judgment. The apology would probably never reach them, but it needed to be written anyway. The Coalition accepted Velthar's report within a week. Changes happened faster than anyone expected. High Command had been desperate for solutions. The war was being lost. Human effectiveness offered hope. Orders went out across all sectors. Human forces were redesignated from assault infantry to rapid response elites. Their casualties dropped immediately. Other species transitioned to support roles. The Krell became logistics specialists. The Vorns handled communications. The Trell managed supply lines. Everyone did what they were best at. The humans fought, and they were very, very good at it. The war's momentum began to shift. Velthar's request for liaison assignment was approved with conditions. The Observer needed psychological treatment first. Months of therapy to process the trauma, to learn how to function around humans without constant fear. It was slow progress. The nightmares never completely stopped, but they became manageable. The hardest part was admitting what the fear meant. Velthar had not just been afraid of violence, had been afraid of humans themselves, afraid of what they represented, afraid of predators who could think and plan and cooperate, afraid that prey species like the Krell were obsolete. That evolution had moved past them, but humans did not make Velthar feel obsolete. They made the Observer feel safe. That was the strangest part, the thing that took longest to understand. Humans were dangerous, yes, but they were dangerous to enemies, to threats. They protected those who could not protect themselves. They were predators, but they had chosen their prey carefully. After treatment, Velthar returned to Threshold 9. Squad 7 was still there, training new human units. They remembered the Observer. Hana greeted Velthar with genuine warmth. The others nodded in acknowledgement. They did not mention the report. Did not talk about how it had changed everything. They just accepted Velthar back like the Observer had never left. Velthar's new role was bridge builder, helping other Coalition species understand humans, translating not just language but culture, explaining why humans did things that seemed illogical, why they took risks, why they valued honor and loyalty over survival, why they could laugh at death and cry over small kindnesses. It was harder than expected. Many species refused to work with humans, called them barbarians, monsters, killers who would turn on their allies eventually. Velthar understood the fear, had felt it personally, but the Observer also knew the truth. Humans were violent, but they were not cruel. There was a difference, a crucial difference. One day a Krell delegation came to observe human training. They watched from a safe distance, trembling. Watched Squad 7 teach new recruits how to fight the Void Swarm. The violence made the delegation sick. They wanted to leave immediately. Velthar convinced them to stay for one more demonstration. Hana brought out a simulation, a scenario where civilians were trapped in a combat zone. The new recruits had to decide whether to complete their mission or save the civilians. Every recruit chose the civilians. Every single one. Even when it meant mission failure. Even when it meant personal risk. They always chose to protect the helpless. The Krell delegation was silent after that. They left without commenting. But 2 of them requested assignment to human units as support staff. It was a start. A small one, but progress nonetheless. More would follow. The understanding would spread slowly. Humans were predators, yes, but they were pack hunters who protected their pack. And they had decided the coalition was their pack. Months passed. The war continued, but the losses slowed. Human-led operations had higher success rates, lower casualties, better outcomes. Command gave them more authority, more resources, more trust. They earned all of it. Sector by sector, the coalition pushed back the Void Swarm. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily. Belthar learned to work alongside Squad 7 without fear, learned their humor, their traditions, their strange human customs, learned that Deho liked terrible jokes, that Minho collected pressed flowers from every planet he visited, that G1 could fix anything if given enough time and tape, that Yuna hummed songs when she thought no one was listening. They were not just killers. They were people. Complex, contradictory, fascinating people. They could be gentle and brutal in the same breath, could mourn enemies and celebrate victories, could carry trauma that would break other species and still function, could endure what should not be endurable. They were human. That word meant more than Velthar had ever imagined. One night, Velthar sat with Hana watching the colony's sunset. It was peaceful, quiet. Hard to believe this place had been a battlefield. Hana asked if the observers still had nightmares. Velthar admitted the truth, yes, every night. Scenes from that first observation, 72 hours of combat playing on repeat. Hana nodded slowly. Said she had nightmares too. So did Deho, Minho, G1, and Yuna. All of them carried scars that did not show. All of them woke up sometimes thinking they were back in combat. It never completely went away. You just learned to live with it. Learned to function despite it. Learned that you were not alone in carrying the weight. Velthar understood then. The observer's trauma was not weakness. It was just different. Different species processed horror differently. But they all carried it. Human and Krell, predator and prey, they all bore scars from this war. That shared burden created something new, something that had not existed before, understanding across the vast divide. Hana said something that night that Velthar never forgot. She said the difference between humans and the Void Swarm was choice. The Swarm consumed because they had to. It was their nature. Humans could be violent, could be terrible, but they chose when and where and why. They chose to protect. They chose to endure. They chose to stand between the innocent and the dark. That was humanity's greatest weapon. Not their capacity for violence, not their endurance or determination or tactical skill. Their greatest weapon was the ability to choose. To look at horror and decide to face it anyway. To see suffering and decide to stop it. To encounter the monstrous and decide to become something stronger. Choice. Always choice. Years later, when the war finally ended, Velthar would remember that conversation. Would remember sitting with Hana watching a sunset on a world they had saved together. Would remember understanding finally what it meant to be human. Not the violence. Not the strength, but the choice to use that strength for something beyond themselves. The coalition built monuments to the war, listed the dead, honored the sacrifices. Velthar added one more thing. A memorial specifically for the human forces, not just the ones who died. All of them. Because they all sacrificed something. Their innocence. Their peace. Their easy comfort with the universe. They gave up safety so others could have it. Squad 7 came to the dedication ceremony. Older now. Marked by time and combat. But still together. Still a unit. Hana read the inscription Velthar had written. She did not cry, but her voice shook slightly. The inscription was simple. Just one line. The same line that had ended the Observer's original report. The one that had changed everything. It said, "Thank you for enduring horror so we did not have to. Thank you for standing when we could not. Thank you for being human, and we are sorry it took us so long to understand." The apology was accepted. The understanding was reached. The bridge was built. Prey and predator could stand together after all, not because the fear disappeared, but because they chose to trust each other anyway. Because some things were more important than instinct, like survival, like friendship, like the shared knowledge that they had faced the dark together and won.